Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we have a really fascinating stack of textbook sources on the table, and our mission for you is simple, but honestly, it's pretty ambitious.
Yeah, we're covering a lot of ground today.
We really are. We're going to figure out how clinical mental health shifted from, hiding patients away in these isolated asylums to basically setting up therapy clinics right next to your local coffee shop.
Right. It's a huge geographical shift.
Exactly. We are unpacking the evolution, the foundational theories, and frankly, the really harsh cutthroat realities of running a private counseling practice today. Because, if you think about it, the way we treat physical injuries makes total geographic sense.
Right. It's very centralized.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
break your leg, you go to a massive hospital. It's obvious. It's this literal fortress of healing right there on the skyline.
Everyone knows exactly where the hospital is. They know what happens inside. And, the entire medical ecosystem is built around that massive central hub.
But try to map out mental health care today. And that centralized fortress is it's largely gone. The geography is completely different.
It's totally decentralized.
Yeah, you might walk past a community mental health clinic tucked between like a dry cleaner and a grocery store, and you'd barely even notice it.
We've completely decentralized how we handle human wellness. And to understand where we are now, you really have to look back at the reality of how we used to handle these issues.
Which was not great.
No, not at all. For a very long time, severe mental health struggles basically just meant isolation. If someone had a serious psychological disturbance, the standard protocol was institutionalization.
Right, locking them away.
Exactly. Patients were physically removed from their communities and placed into these massive state hospitals. It was very much out of sight, out of mind.
So looking at the sources, they pinpoint the Community Mental Health Centers Act of 1963 as kind of the legislative earthquake that ended that era.
Yes, that was the turning point.
The government essentially mandated a shift from isolation to community care. They provided federal funding to establish mental health centers directly in local neighborhoods. And this kicked off what the texts call deinstitutionalization.
Right. Moving patients out of those massive state facilities and treating them locally.
It was a monumental shift in social philosophy.
It really was.
Yeah.
The whole idea was that people heal better when they remain connected to their families, their jobs, their actual communities.
Okay, let's unpack the mechanics of that shift for a second. Because instead of hiding people away in these isolated hospitals, the government scattered clinics everywhere. It's almost like, it's like shifting from those massive room-size mainframe computers hidden in a government basement somewhere to putting a personal computer on everyone's desk.
That's a really good analogy. It makes the resource wildly more accessible for the average person.
Right.
But sticking with that analogy, giving everyone a personal computer also meant creating a massive new set of headaches for the people who actually had to maintain all those computers.
Yeah, the logistics of it.
Exactly. Decentralizing the care introduced incredibly complex hurdles for the providers. And the biggest one was the rise of managed care, which completely altered the landscape.
I actually want to pause on managed care because that phrase gets thrown around a lot in healthcare discussions. What does that actually look like for a counselor on the ground?
Well, it essentially means insurance companies place a gatekeeper between the client and the counselor.
A literal gatekeeper.
Right. An insurance adjuster, someone who, by the way, has never met the patient, might decide that based on a specific diagnosis, the patient only gets, say, 6 sessions of therapy.
Wow. 6 sessions and you're done.
Yep. If the client needs more, the counselor has to fight through layers and layers of bureaucracy just to justify it. Managed care dictates treatment plans based on cost efficiency.
So it's about the bottom line, not the patient's actual needs.
Unfortunately, yes. It leads to much shorter inpatient treatment stays and heavily restricted outpatient care.
So, on top of fighting insurance companies, these outpatient community counselors were suddenly tasked with handling deeply severe, complex psychological disturbances, but without the immediate 247 resources of a hospital backing them up.
Right, they're out on an island.
It's like asking a local neighborhood urgent care clinic to suddenly perform open-heart surgery just because the main hospital shut down.
That is the exact reality counselors face. When a system has to handle a massive volume of people right there in the community and you don't have infinite hospital beds or bottomless resources, well, the strategy has to change.
You can't just react anymore.
Exactly. You can't just sit back and wait for people to get catastrophically sick.
You have to fix the roof before it rains. You have to stop the illnesses before they even start.
And in the clinical world, this effort is broken down into 3 levels of prevention.
Okay, lay them out for us.
Sure. So Tertiary prevention is what most people picture when they think of therapy treating severe ongoing problems, putting out the big fires. Then there's secondary prevention, which is controlling surface issues before they become life-threatening.
But the holy grail, though, is primary prevention, right?
Yes, primary prevention.
Doing the work before the fact,
Huh?
stopping the fire from ever sparking in the first place.
Precisely. And the sources outline a framework for this called Bloom's configural model.
Bloom's configural model.
Yeah. It argues that to prevent mental health crises, counselors need to focus on three specific dimensions: increasing an individual's personal strengths, increasing their social support, and decreasing environmental stress.
Okay, on paper, that sounds incredibly logical. Reduce stress, build a support network, teach coping skills, but executing that in the real world seems like a bureaucratic nightmare.
Oh, it absolutely is.
Yeah.
Which brings us to a really fascinating case study in the material, a guy named Ned.
Ah, yes, Ned and the network.
Right. So Ned is a clinical mental health counselor, and he is deeply, deeply passionate about this primary prevention stuff. He wants to do the work before the clinical treatment is needed.
Right, catching people before they fall.
Exactly. But he cannot get anyone to fund his programs. There are virtually no permanent positions for prevention specialists, so he's constantly stringing together these exhausting short-term grants that require constant renewal.
This highlights what I like to call the IT problem.
The IT problem.
Yeah, when primary prevention works perfectly, absolutely nothing bad happens. So the people holding the purse strings look at the data, they see zero crises, and they say, wait, why are we paying you? Everything is completely fine.
That is exactly it. You are asking investors or government agencies to fund the absence of a crisis.
Which is a terrible sales pitch.
It is a notoriously difficult pitch. So Ned is completely burnt out. He goes into an office to secure yet another grant, and the foundation agent starts aggressively questioning his statistics and his entire approach to prevention.
Oh, man.
Yeah, Ned is intimidated, feeling like he's going to lose all his funding.
But then, and this is the great part of the story, he realizes he doesn't have to fight the battle alone. He has spent years building this massive network of other professionals in the community.
Right, he taps into his community.
He leverages that network. He gets other respected professionals to vouch for his work and his statistics. And because of that collective advocacy, he actually ends up receiving a larger grant from the foundation than he initially asked for.
It's a great victory for Ned, for sure. It shows the power of professional advocacy. But if you zoom out for a second, it really highlights a massive systemic flaw.
Because he shouldn't have to fight that hard in the first place.
Exactly. Counselors shouldn't have to constantly hustle for short-term grants to fund programs that literally save lives. Because when we look at the data, primary prevention isn't just about making people feel happier. It's a matter of life and death.
Especially when it comes to suicide prevention.
Yes, that's a huge area of focus.
The sources detail a specific tool counselors use to assess that risk called the SAD Person Scale. It's a 10-point checklist. And going through it, what struck me wasn't the obvious stuff.
Right. I mean, you don't need a clinical textbook to tell you that severe depression or a previous suicide attempt are massive red flags. Or even the demographic data, the S&A, stand for sex and age, noting that statistically older males are at a much higher risk.
Right. The clinical and demographic symptoms make sense, but it was the letters that pointed to someone's lifestyle that caught my attention.
Like what?
Like E for ethanol or alcohol abuse, which drastically lowers inhibitions, or N for having no spouse, and especially the second S for a lack of social support.
Yeah, that's a critical one.
The scale treats loneliness and isolation with the exact same severity as a clinical symptom.
Because isolation is lethal. The SAD person scale also includes R for rational thinking loss, O for an organized plan, and S for sickness, particularly a chronic or terminal illness. But your point about social support is vital.
It really forces us to ask a rather uncomfortable question. Are we constantly trying to medicate a problem that is actually just environmental?
And that question is the entire foundation of what the material calls the social ecological perspective, or ecosystemic thinking.
Ecosystemic thinking.
Right. It argues that you cannot separate an individual from their family, their community, and their broader cultural context.
So mental health isn't just inside your head.
Not at all. It is inextricably linked to your zip code, your workplace, and the people you surround yourself with.
The sources mention a couple of models for this, like the indivisible self or the wheel of wellness. They basically define optimal human functioning as this dynamic, multidimensional mix.
Yes.
It's physical health, emotional regulation, cognitive sharpness, and interpersonal connections all working together.
Optimal functioning isn't just the absence of illness, it's an active state of wellness.
To bring this down to earth for everyone, let's look at the case study of Eileen and the environment.
Well, this is a great one.
So Eileen grew up in a small, slow-paced, super friendly Midwestern town. That was her ecosystem. But she gets married, and her husband's job relocates them to a massive, fast-paced city.
Complete culture shock.
Total shock. She doesn't know a single soul. People on the street are strangers, the vibe is intense and isolating, and Eileen absolutely hates it. She is deeply, deeply miserable.
And see, in a traditional, purely medical model, a practitioner might look at Eileen's misery, diagnose her with adjustment disorder or depression, and immediately start discussing medication or deep cognitive restructuring.
Right, they try to fix her.
Exactly.
But she didn't get clinical psychiatric treatment. Instead, because she had never finished college, she simply enrolled in a nearby community college.
Just to take some classes.
Yeah, and while she was taking classes, she stumbled into a support group of young women who were in her exact same situation, new to the city, feeling overwhelmed, missing home.
They found each other.
They started meeting off campus, grabbing coffee, building actual friendships, and by the end of the first year, she realized she actually loved her new city.
Her environment changed, and her mental health completely stabilized.
It's the wilting plant scenario.
Oh, I love that analogy.
Yeah.
Explain that.
Well, if you have a houseplant that starts wilting and turning brown, you don't automatically assume it's a defective, broken plant.
Right.
You check if it's in the wrong soil. You check if it's not getting enough sunlight. You check the environment before you try to fundamentally alter the plant. Eileen didn't need deep psychological fixing. She just needed better soil. She needed a community.
And that's why counselors increasingly act as environmental architects. Sometimes, the healthiest, most effective intervention a clinical mental health counselor can perform is helping a client change their environment.
Or helping them actively build a support system.
Yes, rather than just sitting in a room talking about their internal feelings for an hour a week.
Which is such a refreshing, holistic way to look at wellness. But, and this is a big, but let's look at the sheer scale of the problem. Because even with these prevention models, and even when counselors act as brilliant environmental architects, the volume of mental health disorders we are facing as a society is staggering.
It really is. The raw data provided in these sources paints the picture of a modern epidemic.
Yeah, hit us with the numbers.
Well, it's estimated that roughly 10 to 25% of the population experiences some form of depression. And anxiety disorders affect about 40 million adults, which is roughly 18% of the adult population.
But the statistic that completely floored me was regarding trauma.
Yeah, that one is intense.
It's estimated that approximately 2/3 of adults will suffer a traumatic event in their lifetime. 2/3.
It's a huge majority.
If you are sitting in a coffee shop or a meeting room, the statistical majority of the people around you will deal with significant trauma. Yet, despite how incredibly common this is, there is still a massive suffocating stigma attached to seeking help.
And stigma isolates people, which, as we just learned from the sad person scale, only increases the risk of severe lethal outcomes.
So how do we fight it?
Well, society generally fights this stigma in 3 primary ways: protest, education, and contact.
Okay, protest makes sense to me. Rallying against unfair stereotypes, boycotting movies that portray mental illness as villainy. And education obviously makes sense, running public health campaigns, giving people the actual facts and statistics to dispel myths. But the source material emphatically pushes contact as the most effective method.
Yes, contact is key.
I have a hard time buying that, honestly. Just getting a coffee with someone rewires societal stigma better than a massive, well-funded education campaign. How does that actually work?
Fundamentally, it's because human beings are wired for story and connection, not spreadsheets.
Okay.
Textbooks and statistics do not change hearts. I mean, if a public health campaign hands you a pamphlet with objective facts about schizophrenia, you might intellectualize it. You might agree with it on a cognitive level.
Sure.
But if you sit down and have a conversation with a vibrant, funny, engaging person who happens to be managing schizophrenia, that changes your internal bias entirely.
Ah, I see. It humanizes the label.
Exactly. Personal interaction with someone from a stigmatized group forces the brain to realize that a diagnosis does not define a human being. The clinical label falls away and you just see a person. It
Mhm.
creates immediate visceral empathy that no pamphlet can replicate.
That makes a lot of sense. So we look at this landscape. We have millions of people needing care, a society that is slowly but surely breaking down stigmas through human contact, and an entire generation of counselors trained to provide this deeply empathetic, life-changing support.
Right.
You might assume that opening a therapy practice today is a guaranteed gold mine. You hang a shingle, people come to you, you help them, and you make a great living.
Yeah, you would think so.
But the sources take a hard left turn here. The business side of empathy is wildly complicated.
It's incredibly difficult. Being an empathetic listener and being a successful business owner require completely different skill sets.
Mhm.
Now, not all counselors go into private practice.
Right, there are other paths.
Right. Many work in employee assistance programs, or EAPs, providing short-term, solution-focused counseling for workplace issues, or they work for community agencies. But for many coming out of grad school, the ultimate dream is the private practice, the fee-for-service model.
Being your own boss, setting your own hours.
Exactly.
Which brings us to our final case study. Cicely sends out notices, which is just a tragically funny look at how this dream violently collides with reality.
Oh, poor Cicely.
Mhm.
Her heart was absolutely in the right place, but her execution demonstrates a glaring hole in how counselors are trained.
Right. So Cicely finishes all her coursework, she passes her national counselor exam, and she's so thrilled that she throws this massive Independence Day party.
A literal party.
Yeah. She gathers all her friends and family and proudly announces that within the next few months, she is opening her own private practice.
And then Monday morning rolls around.
Reality hits her like a freight train. She
Mhm.
realizes, oh, wait, I don't actually have my state license yet, which takes months and months of supervised hours.
Yep.
She has no specific specialty to market to clients. And most incredibly, she confesses she has absolutely zero clue how to actually set up a business.
None.
No idea how to do billing, no idea how to handle insurance, no idea how to market. The embarrassment must have been awful.
You had to be crushing.
She has to completely abandon her dream, pack it away, and go work for a community mental health agency.
And the sad thing is, you see this constantly. Graduate programs are incredibly rigorous when it comes to clinical skills, ethics, and developmental theories.
They train great therapists.
They do. But they often treat the business side of counseling as somewhat taboo. It's almost as if focusing on money taints the purity of the helping profession. And this leads to this really naive idealism.
It really seems like to run a successful private practice today, you have to be half empathetic healer and half Shark Tank entrepreneur.
Yes.
Because empathy alone is a terrible business strategy.
It really is. The hurdles outlined in the material are daunting for a solo practitioner. First, you have to become savvy in what's called pull marketing.
Which isn't just like buying a billboard or running a Facebook ad, right?
No, not at all. Pull marketing is about organically attracting clients by establishing yourself as an authority. It requires investing massive amounts of time into building a referral engine within your community.
So networking.
Relentless networking. You have to go to events, introduce yourself to doctors, lawyers, school counselors, community leaders, so that when someone they know is struggling, they pull clients toward your practice.
You also have to navigate legal landmines. The sources mention restrictive non-compete covenants.
Those are the worst.
Right. Like if you start out working for an agency to gain experience, they might force you to sign a contract preventing you from opening your own practice within a 20-mile radius for several years.
It traps a lot of people. And then there is the administrative nightmare of complex billing. If you accept insurance, you are back to fighting with managed care over reimbursement rates and session approvals.
The gatekeepers again.
Always the gatekeepers. And perhaps the most stressful part of solo private practice. Managing sudden client emergencies entirely on your own.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, you don't have a hospital's backing or a team of colleagues down the hall to consult with when a crisis hits at 2 a.m. It's just you.
It is an incredibly high-stress, high-risk endeavor. So why do it? Why do so many counselors fight through the business training, the marketing, and the isolation to launch a private practice?
Ultimately. Because the payoff for surviving all of that is freedom. You get freedom from managed care dictating your treatment plans. You have the ability to serve a very specific niche of clients that you are deeply passionate about.
You get to do the work you want to do.
Exactly. You gain control over your own professional destiny.
Well, we've traced an incredible journey today. We started back in the 1960s with the government clearing out those massive isolated state institutions and dropping mental health care right into our neighborhoods, creating this decentralized system.
A completely new landscape.
Yeah. And then we saw how counselors like Ned have to fight tooth and nail just to get funding to prevent crises before they happen, trying to convince people to pay for the absence of a fire.
The IT problem.
We learned from Eileen that sometimes the best medicine isn't medicine at all, but simply a better environment, checking the soil, not the plant.
Right.
And finally, we saw the modern hustle required to actually run a private practice today, where empathy has to be paired with ruthless business acumen.
It is a complex, ever-evolving ecosystem. Surviving and thriving in it requires professionals who are not just clinically skilled, but socially, politically, and economically aware.
As we wrap up, there is one final, really unaddressed tension drawn directly from these sources that I want to leave you with.
Okay, what is it?
Well, the material notes a growing, intense dissatisfaction with managed care. It's frustrating for counselors who want to actually help people, and it's deeply frustrating for clients who are told their trauma only warrants 6 sessions.
Right. It's a broken system.
Because of that friction, many consumers who can afford it are choosing to bypass insurance entirely, paying out of pocket for these savvy, independent, private practitioners.
Which naturally creates a two-tiered system.
Exactly. It forces you to wonder, as mental health care becomes more of a consumer-driven, cash-only, fee-for-service market, a market that demands sharp business skills and aggressive marketing from its therapists, what happens to everyone else?
That is the million-dollar question.
Will the vulnerable populations who most deeply need that community support, the ones who rely on insurance or local clinics, be priced out of the very care these counselors are being trained to provide? Are we building a beautiful, empathetic healing system that only half the population can afford to enter? Let that marinate.